Shalom, welcome back to the rolling hills of Judea, just east of the famous East Jerusalem, in uh, what some like to call the West Bank. I have settled here, therefore I am officially in the flesh a West Bank settler, and of course I'm right. I'm Bob. Technically it's Bobby, but we won't go there. So the big news, of course, is Russia fighting Ukraine. There's nothing, nothing much else in most people's eyes. But as far as Israel, as far as staking Jews' claims in Israel, and also the potential for a heated a new round of conflict potentially with Hamas and who knows who else. The High Court in Jerusalem decided on the case of Sheikh Jarrah, aka Shimon Tzadik, and this really did not go well. It's kind of crazy and out there, establishing a new precedent, but we'll talk about it. The um, the neighborhood. So first of all, this is a three-judge panel. They I don't quite understand exactly how the Israeli justice system works, but the High Court can add justices. So even though you got your petition or whatever heard by the Supreme Court, it doesn't mean it's really the Supreme Court. It's like, it's quasi Supreme Court. They go up to 9 justices, and then apparently when they get to 9 justices, then it really is final. Um, in this case, it was by 3 justices, um, two joining the decision to create a decision, and then the third one, of course, uh, um, voting against. So the 3 justices: Yitzchak Amit, Daphna Barak Erez, and Noam Solberg. Noam Solberg dissented. Justice Yitzchak Amit wrote the decision. Um, So everybody agrees that the land that in question, it's a block of apartments. I haven't actually been there myself. It's not so easy to go to right now. Um, the Was built, and the land was owned by a Jewish trust before 1948. The Jordanians conquered all of what has historically been Jerusalem. There had been building already on the west side, which which Jews maintained, and then of course Jerusalem wound up being split with the old city, the historic Jerusalem, and the even older what is now Ir David, the national park, where they've uncovered the ruins of the original Jerusalem, which sat below the Temple Mount. That all wound up in Jordanian hands. Um, the And of course Jews couldn't go there. They couldn't go to the hotels in the old city. They couldn't go to the old city at all from 1948 to 1967. In 1967, Israel, of course, reconquered that land, and they decided not to expel any of the Arabs living there, and even ones who were illegally in Jewish-owned properties. They created this protected tenants law, and that provided that as long as the original tenants, their descendants, and their descendants, their descendants stayed in the property, they could continue living there. But if the property actually belonged to Jews, then they had to pay rent to the Jewish owners. Of course, the people in this apartment complex decided they didn't want to pay rent. Actually, really, they decided nationalistically that they don't recognize Israel, yet Israel's like giving them all the regular rights, and doesn't keeps them there because hey, why not? Um, so everyone agrees to this. There's no question about the origin. The trust later sold it to an organization, the Nachalat Shimon Foundation, after or company, after the name of the neighborhood, Shimon Tzadik. His grave is there. That's why it's called Shimon. It was called Shimon Tzadik neighborhood, and Nachalat Shimon. Nachalat is like is like inheritance of Shimon, legacy of Shimon. So they took over. They bought the rights because then they were able to go and fight all the court battles. So they stepped in for instead of the original owners, they became the new owners, but they still acquired the ownership. Now every other court has agreed that the property belonged to the Jewish trust. Every court had already agreed, including the High Court on a few occasions, had agreed that the owner, that the people living there were tenants. They were not owners. All the Jordanian documents point to the fact that that they were that they're tenants. They do not have any original sorry, not original. They don't have any copies even of the original contracts. Um, what they've presented to the court is a sample contract that they got from Jordan, which states that you have to get off of UNRWA, which is the UN refugee organization for Israel. Every other country in the world, every other refugee in the world is covered by a different organization. One organization. There's one organization for Jews, for well, not Jews. There's one organization for Arabs in Israel, and then there's one organization by the UN, and then there's one organization for every other refugee in the world. So all the refugees in Ukraine and everything will be covered by the other organization. UNRWA is the one, UNRWA. They even made it hard to pronounce on purpose. They are the ones who handle any refugees here. We're also of course, the only country where the refugee status is inherited. Usually, I think after 10 years, you are no longer a refugee. You've been resettled wherever you're going to be, and that's it. But we have, the UNRWA still considers them refugees from 1948. Okay, so the they don't have any documents. There's a clause that says they are allowed to buy the apartments after a certain amount of time, investing a certain amount of money in a certain amount of improvements in the buildings. Then they were forced to not accept refugee status anymore. Every court has agreed to that. There, in 1967, Israel passed after 1967, Israel passed a law that said that any Arab who is living in Jewish-owned property, they can't be evicted as long as they stay in the property and pay rent. So the that's the case in this property. They are protected tenants. Every court, including the High Court, has agreed in the past that yes, they are protected tenants, and that the clause, while it does exist in their contracts, because so they did present them with a sample contract, but the Israeli court has accepted. Okay, fine. We assume this is the contract. They and it says you can buy it, but nobody bought it. And it was not just, oh, hey, we're going to give it to you for free. So, the ownership has never been an issue. The court had originally scheduled for them to be, for some of the tenants to be evicted in March. This was a court hearing about those tenants, and they came up with a new legal theory that, first of all, one of the strange things that Israel has done, it made sense at the time, but the fact that it has never been corrected is a failing on our part, is that we are still governed by Jordanian and British law. Unless the Knesset actually passed a law to overturn that, whatever the Jordanians said, whatever the British said, okay, that's the law. The court has gone a step further, and that now in this ruling it says that they always did this, is they assume that the Jordanians are just as fair as the Israelis. Now, yes, according to international opinion, Israel is illegally occupying this area. I don't quite understand what makes it different from any other area, but the but the Judaians were equally illegally occupying here. So, like, to say, oh no, we believe everything. Plus it's freaking Jordan. Everything is above board there. No, everything was going to be absolutely fair and everything. Um, that seems like an odd assumption to make, but okay, let's roll with that. They also said in the opinion, and the opinion is long. I did not read all of it. I did my best to read as much as I could of any pertinent information. A lot of it is the history of how they got to this point. But it's like 90 pages, and it's in Hebrew. And so between Google Translate and going back and checking it against the original wording in Hebrew, I've done my best to understand it. I will recommend the Times of Israel on this one because they actually had a very good article. After I went through and sort of double checked it, I was like, oh yeah, that is what's going on here. Um, so and let me quote from Times of Israel. In an unprecedented move, the High Court ruled that the Palestinians could not be evicted unless the Justice Ministry examined the Palestinians' claims to the homes. The Justice Ministry is responsible for sorting out land registration and issuing titles to property, but has effectively frozen the process in much of East Jerusalem, citing political and logistical difficulties. Okay, so even though it's been ruled as always, they introduced this concept that maybe the Jordanians were really in the process of registering the land in the names of these Arabs. Maybe we're not quite understanding the contract, and therefore, because like I said, it just said you have a right to buy it. So we're gonna throw it back to the political wing, knowing full well that the political wing will sit on this because the coalition right now is run by Arabs, and um, on top of that, even when it's not, even under His Highness Bibi, I have no, I, I, I for one didn't have such a great problem with Bibi being kicked out, but I don't think Bibi was that wonderful. He was a lot better than what we got, but that's a different story. So even under Bibi, it's not. They know that they'll just sit on it. As it stated in the document, in the ruling that they've cited logistical and which is true because the Arabs want to have nothing to do with this process and they're being egged on by the Palestinian Authority to not pay rent, to deny Israel has any validity, has any valid claim to the land, and therefore, who are you to tell us whether we own the property? We don't know. Who are you to tell us that we owe rent to anyone or not? So, yeah, that's fun. Um, they so now we have they ruled that the Justice Ministry has to go back and figure it out. Okay, even assuming they did, they also required them to pay rent. Okay, well, how much is the rent? $740. Oh, that's a lot. That's a good amount for an apartment in the U.S. I mean, here it's like crazy more expensive. Like 2 bedroom in Jerusalem is going to be like is going to be like more like 1,000 for like this the yuckiest one, and then it goes up from there. But that's not per month. That's per year. $740 a year. 2,500 shekels, approximating to $740. So that's what they have to deposit in an account that will be an escrow, so it belongs to the Nachlat Shimon Corporation, but it doesn't. They can't actually touch it unless they breach it. Of course, they haven't paid until now, so money stana. Um, all right, so yeah, instead of deciding ownership, like because you're like the court, let's throw it over to somebody else. Let's because maybe their claims weren't heard when they weren't allowed to make a claim to a government official, so therefore, maybe they can make an argument, but they've never presented any documents saying that they could. All right. Um, so, in a little bit of other news, the Supreme Court also is getting 4 new justices. But despite Naftali Bennett's promise to be the most right wing, uh, government ever, 10 degrees right of Bibi, and despite the fact that it was alleged and ostensibly right wing minister, Gideon Sar, who's not from Bennett's party, he's from a different party called New Hope, which originally I thought about voting for just for the Star Wars reference, but then I learned more and I decided not to vote for them. So they were is basically more of the same. In particular, we are going to have our first Muslim judge. Wouldn't it be great if all of the judges were Muslim? Um, they Gideon Sar had apparently was very open that they prioritized uh, diversity because we can be just as woke as America. Isn't that great? Um, what could possibly go wrong? Who wouldn't start it's like it's like Ukraine. Let's get some. We'll just import some Russians here so that we can have some we'll have more diversity and everything. We'll just put them in charge of the government and the courts and everything. It'll be wonderful. It'll be what could possibly go wrong? All right. Anyways, I will post the link to the Times of Israel article. I don't really have much to say on the Ukrainian and Russian conflict, just because it's not Israel. It's not Israeli. It's not Israel. I don't know how much it's Israel's business. Israel has come out in favor of the Ukrainians because, while everybody else was doing it. As one rabbi pointed out to me years ago, that when Moses is standing in front of Pharaoh and he's all these plagues are happening and God tells him so that Pharaoh will know that that I am God and Egypt will know. So he said, what's the point of making Egypt know? What about the Jews? He said, because whatever the Egyptians do, the Jews will want to imitate. So if the Egyptians believe that this is the hand of God, then the Jews will too. So that's where we stand. Wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Hopefully there will be good news in the future. Next week, I will try and maybe I'll try and see if I can find some. I mean, of course, there is good news here. A lot of it has to do with a lot of it is business related, and I don't know. It's not so impressive to me. I would rather see a serious government and have an economy that's kind of so-so than a very strong economy and a government that has no idea what it's doing. Um, and that sometimes works against Jews being here at all. Okay. I'm sorry. I do want to say. So we are expecting an influx of Ukrainians as as Olim. The As many people know, the restrictions. First of all, there does seem to be a sizable Jewish um, uh, population in Ukraine. It's always been an issue of contention with the Ukrainians how many of them actually are Jewish, because Israel, of course, has the law of return, which says anyone whose grandfather was Jewish, anyone who's married to someone Jewish, can make aliyah and become a citizen. In recent years, they had made it much more complicated for especially people from the former Soviet Union. I'm assuming they will drop some of those requirements with the Ukrainians, but I really don't know anything that they all don't know. All right, Shabbat Shalom, and thank you for listening.